Mm.
All right. Good morning. Welcome to the deep dive on advanced directives. I'll give a couple seconds here for everyone to get into the Zoom room, and then we will get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good whatever, wherever you are. Okay, I know we're going to have a lot of questions, so let's get started, and at least we can just get through the basic stuff. Claritza, BJ, would you like to just quickly introduce yourselves?
Yeah, Claritza.
Hi everyone, I'm Claritza Rios, and I am a palliative care physician, and I work at City Block Health. Been across the care continuum as an emergency medicine doctor, a hospitalist, and a palliative care consultant, and really excited to be here and share some of this information with you all. BJ?
Great to be here with you, Claritza. I really enjoy doing these with you, my friend. I'm not quite as cool as you. I'm only an internal medicine doc who then went into palliative care. I'm not triple boarded. Jeez Louise. But yeah, I'm a palliative care doc, and co-founder of Mettle Health, this sort of backdrop with Sonia, and in which Claritza and you and I and others get to work. And yeah, very happy and proud about that. Okay, guys. Well, let me just say a few things, and then we'll cut back to you, Sones. For many of you guys who are here, I think you have been here before. You know the drill. It's just Claritza and I are going to go through these slides, and actually pretty quickly because there are already questions piling up, and that's really the fun part. So we'll kind of, just to level set, we'll go through these slides and kind of get some basics out. This is not meant to be comprehensive. It's sort of the ballpark. And then we'll cut to you guys for questions. And basically, this is, as I say, a safe space. So really, you don't have to say or do anything. Just listen, but also don't hold back. Questions, comments, stories you want to share. The boundaries here are simply basically kindness, and we got to kind of watch the clock, but that's about it. So with that, over to you, Sones.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for being here. So like BJ said, we're probably going to try to get through these slides pretty quickly because we know that there's going to be lots of questions about advanced directives because they are in fact quite confusing. So after they get through the slides, there's two ways that you can ask a question. You can raise your hand and we will unmute you and you can talk to BJ and Claritza. Or if you'd prefer not to do that, you can type it into the Q&A and I will read it aloud for you for them to answer. So again, two ways: raise your hand, speak out loud, or type it into the Q&A and I will do it for you. The chat is also open, so if you just have a comment about something that's being said or want to share anything, please feel free to do that. And thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Sonia. And if you guys like the slides, it's because Sonia is so awesome at making them. So the artwork and everything else generally coming from Sonia. All right, guys. Well, shall we jump in? All right, Claritza. Power of attorney for healthcare. It's kind of a mouthful. What is it? What is it?
Yeah, so really important to know that it comes in many names. Healthcare agent, healthcare power of attorney, proxy. You'll hear these terms used in different states differently. You'll even use, they'll be used interchangeably. It's important to differentiate power of attorney for healthcare from financial power of attorney. But basically this term means that this is someone that you have assigned as the person who would help make medical decisions for you in this situation when you're unable to make medical decisions for yourself. And that this is also often a piece of paper in which that person is named. Want to differentiate it from financial power of attorney often because of family structure and personal situations, relationships. Sometimes that person who's the power of attorney for one thing may not be the right person for healthcare. Or they may be the perfect person for all of it. but it's important to differentiate them. They're assigned separately, but because this POA term is used, we just want to clarify that they're different. Any other thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll get into it, but I think, you know, the advanced directive as a document, as a thing, and we'll get into its meat here in a moment. But I would say, I think, generally speaking, there's sort of nothing more important than an advanced directive does than names this person. And we'll talk about this again too. This person, by the way, their job only kicks in when you cannot speak for yourself. So it doesn't mean that they have all of a sudden can usurp your decision making, or, you know, whatever it is. It's only in the event that you can no longer speak for yourself. And again, we'll get into more details. But it's probably the single most important piece of this puzzle is to name this person, because so many decisions that are going to need to be made, their details, their mitigating circumstances, there's just complexity, and to try to forecast how you're going to want to make every decision in advance is probably kind of impossible, or very, very difficult, let's say. So this person gets to move in real time with the medical team making decisions. And that's why, in particular, even if you've stated all your wishes, there's still going to be decisions that need to be made. And this person is paramount. So
it's important to also note that this person is every state has their own sort of rules about them, but has to be an adult, and they themselves have to be able to make decisions, and every state sort of differentiates that, but an adult, and again, somebody who's able to express your wishes.
Yeah, on that note, maybe we should take another second here. Like, you know, a couple thoughts. One is, like it says here, alternative proxy. You can have multiple proxies. You can name multiple people, which is generally a good idea in case someone can't be reached. Also to share sort of the load of the work of being the proxy, so that that person has other people to work with. It can be really helpful to name multiple proxies. And unless you really know the dynamic among them, it also makes sense to put like a first, second, third agent. So there's just clarity when, you know, push comes to shove and maybe the proxies have disagreements among them. It is very helpful to have sort of the buck stops somewhere. So it's often helpful to name a sort of a pecking order. And the last thing to say about it, oh, sorry, Claritza, what were you going to say?
No. I think you're going to say it.
Well, it can feel like an honor, like, my gosh, this person's so important, they're going to speak on my behalf. Like, on some level, what bigger honor is there? And very often the person you might want to honor may not be the best proxy. That person may be, for example, a spouse or a parent. Like my mom, if my mom were my proxy, Mom, if you're here, I love you so much, like too much. I don't know that you could think clearly in the heat of a hospitalization on my behalf, put your feelings aside and act on my behalf. It's not necessarily easy. So yes, it can be flattering or an honor, but that's not really the best criterion from which to choose the right person.
100%. To piggyback on that, so it's important to also know that as you're coming up with these like hierarchy, like proxy, alternative proxy, and this may not always be possible, but it would be helpful for there to be a good amicable relationship between the two people, because of what BJ brought up, which is this idea that there may be moments where there may be disagreement. And so especially if one of the things people worry about is our legacy, right? And our legacy a lot of times is that interpersonal relationships and how our passing may affect them. We want to make sure that we set things up so that people have, we want to have conversations ahead of time so that people have guidelines, right? And have an idea of your values and that kind of stuff. And we'll talk about that more. But also, we're not going to put two people that are not seeing eye to eye for, outside of this particular topic to make decisions, because you can imagine that that's going to cause a lot of friction, and we don't want that to further the divide. And so I think it's really important to make sure that those people at least can be kind to each other, even if they don't see eye to eye all the time, so they can problem solve together, because sometimes, you know, a lot of decisions will require that.
Right on. Amen. Amen, Mama. Okay, well, let's move on just because there's so much. But yeah, all of these are tips of icebergs, guys. So I guess we kind of let the cat out of the bag on this one. I think you and I both just learned this phrase.
Effective authority, yeah. So basically, just because you do the document, it doesn't mean that the person who you named now is going to make all decisions for you. It only goes into effect when someone who has expertise in assessing your ability to make medical decisions says this person can no longer make medical decisions for themselves, either henceforth or just temporarily because of an emergency. And we are now going to have that power of attorney or the healthcare proxy come in and help us make decisions. But it's not, you know, going to be effective immediately.
And by the way, so that, you know, just to name it a little bit more specifically, so when you can't speak for yourself, not like when you have a mouthful of food or something. It's like when you know, it's just like when let's say you've been in an accident and you're intubated and sedated, you know, that you can't talk then, you can't speak for yourself, for example. Or sometimes, you know, if an actual accidental ingestion or an overdose and you're just out of it, you know, that's another moment where you couldn't speak for yourself. But they're also more chronic. So these are more sort of acute, something happens and then all of a sudden you can't talk for yourself. But there's also like in the ravages or the fallout or the effects, let's just say, of dementia. At some point, if your executive function is such that you just don't know who you are or where you are, or actually really more to the point for the definition of capacity, and that's a medical definition, and a doctor has to say whether anyone else has capacity. That's a medical distinction. The legal distinction is competence, just to get into the weeds for a second, but the medical word is capacity, and so a doctor gets to say. And so that generally has to do with not so much, you might think it's 1912, but if you can show insight into your situation and you know decisions that you're being asked to make and the repercussions of those decisions, then you would still have capacity, even if you don't know what day it is. So it gets a little, not to get us drowned out in the weeds here, but let's just want to kind of note some of the where these lines are placed when you can no longer speak for yourself. There's a lot that hides behind that phrase.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah, and I just want to, the reason why we wanted to make a slide specifically for this is that autonomy is really important, and we wouldn't want anybody to think, oh my goodness, I have this like chronic illness diagnosis, or I know I have to do this paperwork, but I'm afraid of losing my autonomy. This paperwork is in place so that you always are in control, and it will never go into play unless it absolutely needs to.
Right on. And it's probably worth saying, because I can tell it's just impossible to talk about advanced directives without tripping over one's tongue. It gets complicated, and there's all these rules and exceptions to rules and circumstance specific things and la la la. Let's just be clear here. The reason just is still not all that notwithstanding, the goal of an advanced directive, an advanced care planning process, is to take a very chaotic, unintuitive situation and make it somewhat more manageable, traversable, navigable. And to your point, Claritza, not just manageable, but, you know, reflecting what you want, not just all the things that could happen within the medical world, because that's a ridiculously long list. So the purpose of these things are to make an unmanageable situation a little bit more manageable, and to protect your voice, not to lose your voice. So let's not forget that forest for the trees. All right, shall we move it along?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. What to say here? I mean, it is a black and white. I mean, again, you're going to feel this. We're taking these zillions of things that could happen, all sorts of unknowns about prognosis, the limitations of science, the beautiful mushiness of the subjective, what makes a life worth living. There's so much big stuff behind this very black and white clerical piece of paperwork. So again, I just want to at least name the ridiculousness of this process, but it's the alternative is even more ridiculous. So what else do we want to say here, Claritza? Does anything else jog in your mind?
Yeah, I think that it calls me to say it's so important that this is a conversation that continues when you ask somebody to be your proxy, that it's a big responsibility, and that we're going to have this paper, and I am trusting you, and there's going to be nuance, and it's going to be sticky, and it's going to be messy, and so it has to be ongoing, especially if you have a chronic illness and things kind of shift and move, and again, as the slide says, it's a paper that's black and white, and it doesn't have every single detail, and so conversations are so key and important.
All the more reason that proxy, naming the proxy who can in real time move with a lot of the gray zones, is so critical. And by the way, guys, while we're on it, it is a black and white piece of paper, and you can rip it up. As you said, Claritza, these things change. Especially living with chronic illness, your mind's likely to change over time on what you're willing to live with and not live with, what you want to prolong, what you don't want to prolong.
100%.
Not only can your mind change, it's welcome. But that does mean you need to revisit your advanced directive over time and make sure to update it.
Yep.
And related, I would say one thing. Oh, sorry, sweetheart. I was just going to say one thing on that is, like, by the way, if there's a moment where you lose capacity and your proxy is involved to speak on your behalf, if you get better, let's just say there's something like this overdose or something, and you come back to your senses, then you get back into the driver's seat. So just to name, these are fungible, movable moments.
Definitely. And as an example, prior to becoming a mother, I had very black and white. If X happens and I cannot do Y, then I'm out. Basically, I was do not resuscitate, do not intubate. And I became a mother, and it changed completely. And sort of what is it? How present can I be for children if X, Y, and Z happens, and my advanced directive change? And so my proxy had to be reinformed on how my values change. And so it can be reset, it can be rewritten, it can be adjusted. That's important.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're good here.
Yeah, and I guess the text on the right. I mean, if there is sort of a distillation of what a lot of the questions on an advanced directive get at, is sort of like, do you want to keep going with what all that medicine can try or not? Do you want to let death happen, or do you want to do everything you can to keep it at bay? It is a sort of a reductive one-liner. It does a lot of the questions get at whether to prolong this situation or not. But again, that's probably overly reduced. So, all right, moving on. So, like, speaking of prolonging, like, what are we talking about here? So this gets at sort of the guts of an advanced directive. Can you kind of walk us through some of these things, Claritza?
Yeah, and so a lot of the treatments that the proxy and you will have to sort of make decisions about are whether you want to use artificial means to keep you breathing, right? So using ventilator to sustain your respiratory system and therefore give you oxygen and keep you alive. Using artificial means to give you nutrition or hydration, using medications such as antibiotics and other medications that can help sustain your life, things like adrenaline, et cetera. And then other treatments that help other systems. For example, we can't work without kidneys, so dialysis would be another treatment that can help prolong your life. And it's important to note that when you're thinking about these treatments and you're making decisions, and anytime that a treatment is offered, it's important, and BJ and I were just talking about this before we started. One of the things that can often feel is like a menu, like, all right, well, they're giving me this, so it's available. So somebody thought that this was a really great idea. The way that these conversations happen aren't always keeping in consideration or at the forefront of our minds an appraisal, a discussion, a weighing of the risk and benefits as they pertain to suffering. They really are focused on life prolongation, keeping you alive, and maybe not so much on the very person-centered things that are, obviously we all want to live as long as we can, right? But comfort, pain, what it's going to look like. And so it's important to know that yes, we want to make sure that we're understanding, your thoughts about these treatments. But it's also important to know that when we in the medical field offer them, or just because they're available, they don't always equate to prolonging life and prolonging quality of life. And so that's something to always keep in mind.
Yes, that's a huge, huge point, guys. And especially as medical science advances, or at least gets more complicated, I think a lot of people I've worked with in advanced directive will say, well, let's try everything, and then when it doesn't work, well, then, the one of the problems there is, never mind, as you're saying, they all come with all sorts of feelings and experiences, and some of them right out of the bag are never expected to work, depending on the situation. Then you're sort of in a charade. But also, if you're waiting for the list of things to try, if you're waiting for that list to go to zero before you, accept your fate, well, that list is probably not going to run out. I mean, these days there's always something more to try in an ICU setting, for example, almost always. So there's a lot of context that needs and conversation needs to happen around each of these things for each person and a moment in time. So ventilator might very well save my life right now, but if I'm living with lung cancer, that is a very different story. So context, again, another reason why all of these things are not just a menu, you pick what sounds good, but they all require conversation. And I'm sorry, I'm just repeating what you said perfectly, but I think it's just key, huge stuff. All right, so let's get on here. There's a lot. I haven't checked in a while, but the organ donation universe is there's a lot to say about it. I mean, for my money, just as a fellow human being, I think it's so gorgeous, the thought that we can swap out organs and a piece of me can go on and help someone else live. And oh my Lord, it is really both a stunning comment on what humans have made of science and a stunning comment of how we might choose to entwine with each other and share ourselves quite literally with each other. It's just something very beautiful. And then there's this whole bureaucracy around it. So I can't pretend to speak to it, but the transplant world is rife with, there's all sorts of constructed barriers to it. There's a lot to say. So I just want to name that's huge. And we're here on one slide. But within the context of advanced planning and advanced directive, it does come up. So what more specifically do we want to say about it here, my friend?
I quickly chime in with something?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, please, go for it.
So when we were learning more about organ donation, I think the thing that really stuck out to me was that if you want to donate your organs at the time of your death, you have to really plan for it. You have to be in a hospital. You have to, there's a lot of things that have to happen. So if you are someone who also wants to die at home, you can still, I think it's your eyes, your corneas that can still be donated. But in general, you are not going to be able to donate your organs because they won't be viable unless they're harvested within a hospital system. So the other thing to think about is body donation, if you want to do that, which is not going to be on the advanced directive form, but that's something that you can do. But I think that's something that most of us don't know, is that if you really feel strongly about donating your organs, you have to plan to die in a hospital, which is a hard thing to do.
Right. Essentially, you need to you can't let those organs die, stop being perfused by blood and oxygen for more than a few seconds for them to be viable. So that's to the point you're making there, Sons, which is really key. And that's not a small piece of coordination. So you may want to donate your organs, and I certainly do. It sounds like a beautiful thing, but the logistics of actually making that happen get tricky and does require some planning. And even with the best planning, just may not be possible. Yeah. Claritza, what do you think? Anything to add here?
If there's ever any thought about donation and how that then affects the body after the fact, if you were to be in a hospital and this was able to happen, there is a ton of care taken to ensure that if you want a viewing after your death and after organ donation, that the body is respected and cared for in a way that a viewing would not be a problem. And I think that's important to also note, because that can get a little bit can be a source of concern.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And I guess one more thing to say too is per Sonia's comment as well, the willed body donation, a willed body program, is not, just to flesh that out for a second, that usually means that you're near an academic medical school or some place that may need cadavers, for example, or tissue that doesn't need to be alive anymore per se, which usually means being near a research hospital or an academic hospital. And to Sonia's point, that's not handled by the DMV or checking a box anywhere here. You would call the medical school ahead of time and say, I'm interested in your willed body program. What's the process? And that can be a lovely thing. Claritza, you and I both spent a year probably with a cadaver and got very close to a cadaver, and that's how we learned.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for that opportunity, 100%. A Google search will get you all of the local resources for anybody who thinks that that's something to think about. I did it yesterday just to see if it was easy to navigate.
Awesome. Okay, my friend, let's. Well, yeah. Again, I think we kind of touched on this a little bit, but let's just hammer it home here. So, well, I think one thing to say to kick us off there, Claritza, one is make sure you finish the document. A lot of people have started them and they got halfway through and whatever, forgot to finish it. So one is just actually complete it. And then, as we've also talked about, is please give yourself plenty of space and, maybe find yourself in something of a routine or a habit of checking your advance directive once a year. Or if you're living with some sort of a chronic illness, anytime there's a change in your health condition, let's say if I've got heart disease and I've live with congestive heart failure and I've moved from stage 3 to stage 4 heart failure, that can be a good moment because that portends different things for your prognosis and what treatments may or may not be helpful to you. So those are good moments in time to revisit these documents to make sure your mind hasn't changed, make sure they're up to date. What else to say here about moments in time to revisit these, Claritza? Anything? Let's see. Marriage status. Let's say you have a falling out with that healthcare proxy. That's a big one. Or maybe your healthcare proxy has become sick or inaccessible themselves, which certainly happens. And maybe also, I'm sorry, I keep talking here, Claritza. I'll shut up.
No, that's great. 100%. So the relationship you have with the person, right? It doesn't have to be a family member. It often is a family member. As you're talking and as you're asking this person, you want to ask them, can you be my healthcare proxy? You want to make sure that they're emotionally in a good place to think of what you'd like, not how much they love you or how much they respect you, right? And that's why sometimes, a good friend who is sort of can see things in a less of an emotional way can be a good person for that. it's important that your partner knows if they're not the healthcare proxy, why they're not being the healthcare proxy. I think BJ very, very nicely said, adore my mother. She's the bomb. And also, I wouldn't want to burden her with this because it would just be too much. And that's okay too. And remember that just like your feelings may change, so may the feelings of the proxy themselves. And so, you know, as you're checking in with people, they may be like, you know what, I'm no longer comfortable doing this for you. So ongoing conversation, checking in on the emotion, and just really being open to the idea that this is not gonna always be a super fun conversation, but one that you can't let the discomfort get in the way of happening, because I promise you, it is so much harder when you're under duress or some stressor to have a conversation with somebody, with me, and for me to, you know, help you navigate that without all this other context that you could have if a conversation happens. If you are the proxy, or if you're being asked to be the proxy, I think it's helpful to the questions that you think will make you the best proxy possible. And since you can't talk about every scenario, I think it's helpful sometimes about like what's non-negotiable, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what would make, you know, the last X amount of days worth living. You know, these questions can be hard, but you want to frame them and ask them in a way that is that honors the person you're talking to. But I think they're so important so that you don't suffer later.
And I guess so, let me also add here on the list of people with whom you should be conversing, it's not just your family, friends, people around you, the proxies. So everyone has a sense of what's important to you. And it just, as you said, Claritza, it is really one of the kindest things you can do for the people who love you, because it takes so much of the guesswork out of when, God forbid, you end up in these situations, and invariably we all do. You take so much of the guesswork out of people who want to just be there for you, but they don't know how. And so filling out this paperwork, but really to the point, having these conversations to plug in the holes so people aren't left to guess in the heat of what's going on, is really a kindness. And let's just also say, again, when we start to say, adding to the list of the conversation, make sure to talk to your doctor about it and your clinical team, my Lord. So that they know your wishes, but it also gives them an opportunity to kind of clarify things. I can't tell you how many times it comes up, most probably often around the artificial hydration nutrition question. As a layperson, if I saw that, yeah, well, I don't want to starve to death. Being thirsty sucks, so of course I'd want artificial hydration nutrition. Talk to a doctor who knows, who's willing and honest, who knows about these things. Well, they might help you understand that at the end of life, and a lot of the trajectories of a lot of different diseases, there comes a time where your body can't take in food or fluids. And so artificially pumping food into your body or fluid into your veins can actually hurt you. So, you know, that little detail is actually really consequential, and you wouldn't get there unless you talk to your doctor about it, for example. So yeah, conversations need to go in multiple ways and happen over time. And I would say, actually, one more thing, there's some data in the last couple of years about advanced directives. Are they actually really helpful? Do they change decision-making in the heat of what's happening in a hospital? And the data are pretty mixed. Just because you filled out an advanced directive is not guarantee that your wishes are going to be followed to a T. And we can talk about that, but to not get too lost in that, I think one thing that is unimpeachable about this process, and if it does nothing else, then it's still worth it, which is that it prompts really juicy, important conversations. I think more and more people are interested in, okay, I get it. We're mortal. Okay, I want to plan for that. How? Well, this tool asks a bunch of questions that are tips of icebergs that prompt other questions and other exchanges and more understanding between people. And in so many ways, that's their power. They're an intimacy tool in a way. All right, shall I? Yeah, I think we should get to questions. Yeah. And then, we did it. Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna pop us out of here. Claritza, fun being with you. Okay, so Sons, what's going on out there?
Yeah, we've got some hands and questions, so let's
do it.
To that. Deborah, let me unmute you here.
Hi there.
Hi there.
My mother is what I call tweenile, and she does have a dementia diagnosis, but some days she's good and some days she's not so good. I'm also a caregiver for a woman who I would say has fairly advanced dementia. She has difficulty eating, oral eating. Her quality of life is sort of, not great, but we can have a good time, such as it is. My question is for myself, actually. When I make an advance directive, I don't ever want to be in that way. And it kind of reminds me of the movie with Al Pacino playing Jack Kevorkian. I want to choose that I would use voluntary stop eating and drinking when I get to a certain milestone. And is there a legal way to put that in an advance directive? I think there is, but I'd like to hear from both of you about that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah, for that question. I mean, you're touching on a really big subject around the legalities, the ethics, the bioethics, the medical framing, all sorts of, there's a lot of ways to take your question, but where I was just headed there is, hastening one's own death. Whether you happen to live in, I think 10 states, including DC now, have laws on the books that if you have a terminal illness, that you can go through a process, and if you meet all the criteria, you can get a prescription for lethal dose of medication and end your own life at the timing of your own choosing. So there's a lot to be said about that process, and that is possible in some states in the US. What is possible anywhere in the US is what you're pointing to, Deborah, which is VSED, an acronym just voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. It is a way that any of us can end our lives legally. You don't need a doctor's prescription to do it, but it does take a while. We can talk about that process if it's helpful. I know that's not really what you asked here, but it's for the audience, just sort of laying that out, what Deborah's pointing to. So with that sort of backdrop, can you put this into paperwork? The short answer is there's room on advanced directives. There are various, every state has their own form. There are these commercial products like the 5 Wishes. Prepare for Your Care, a colleague of ours at UCSF has a website. There are many other versions of variations on this theme. And almost all of them have some zone where you can freehand write in instructions. For example, like you would want to stop eating and drinking, for example. Now, where it gets tricky is if you're not around to say, hey guys, I'm ready to stop eating and drinking, even if you've written in an advance directive, it can be very hard in a family to say, well, she wrote stop eating and drinking, and she can't talk to us now, but anytime I put food near her, she gestures towards it. So then what do we do, practically speaking? So it gets really quickly, ethically, practically difficult. So yes, you can put an advanced directive, but following it out, the advanced directive only kicks in when you can't speak for yourself. And when you can't speak for yourself in that moment, it's pretty hard for any family member to not give you food if you seem to want it in that moment or in that state. Does that make sense, Deborah? And meanwhile,
yes, and it really does just sort of bring home what a complicated, complex issue this is, and bringing choice forward for an individual's end of life when there is compromise in mental decision making. I thank you for that, and I'm looking forward to there getting to be more and more options and clarity on this in the future. So thank you for answering that.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. And I will say, you know, it is what is much more within all of this is the laws are evolving, bioethics are evolving, the technology of what's possible is evolving. Also, this is all, nothing's in concrete here. But to your point, if it's helpful, Deborah, and there is a sort of a situation where you could make it very clear. Let's just say you're in the throes of dementia, not speaking for yourself, but you're not gesturing towards food. You're not, you know, even if someone puts a spoon under it, you're not going for it, or you spit out the food or whatever else. It can be a note to the family to at that point get out. The way I put it is to get out of the way of death. You know, so in a way, forcing food into you or offering it to you if you're not going for it is, you know, that stating that in your advance directive for the family to at that point stop offering you food. That feels importantly different. So there are details that you can transmit in here, and in the dementia specific kind of scenario, I think a lot of families I've worked with I don't want to end, I'm not going to end my loved one's life, but somehow getting out of the way of death, removing the barriers to death does feel importantly different and possible. And that's something that can be transmitted in conversation and advanced directive. So there are little nuancy things in here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And what I hear you saying is it's almost like it's respecting the wishes by actually being passive or something along those lines. But thank you. Yes, very nuanced.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you. Claritza, anything you want to say there, or should we move on?
Yeah, we can move on. I think that was perfect.
Okay. Sounds, what else going on out there?
Yeah, one sec. We got quite a few questions. And there was just a quick note to Deborah's thought about recording an audio note about what you would like. A lot of people are doing that too. So you can record something on your phone and, you know, have that file sent to your proxy or your family member so that they have it. One of the other questions that came in, let's see here. Can you include an in-depth understanding of how do not resuscitate fits into an advanced directive?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it certainly, depending on the form that you use, the advanced directive forms that are out there, you certainly have the opportunity to name your proxies, and then some forms allow you to get specific about what kind of treatment you would want in case your heart stopped and you died. And you can speak to, if you opt for do not resuscitate, allowing a natural death. That's what DNR stands for, do not resuscitate, allowing your death to be the end within those forms. And things like 5 wishes and many of the state issued advanced directive forms actually have a section where you can pick do not resuscitate in there. And also do not intubate, meaning do not use artificial means to ventilate me, to give me oxygen. I don't know if that fully answers the question, but depending on the form, you are able to choose that specifically.
Great. Thank you. All right, we've got quite a few hands up. Let me go to Adela. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Hi, yes, it's Adela, and I'm calling you from, I'm in England, UK. Okay, so I'm in the middle of writing my own power of attorney. And one of the things I decided for is that I want 3 power of attorneys for various reasons. And what I want to know is, what I'm hoping to do is to say that the decisions, providing the majority of 2 of the 3 can agree on a decision, that's fine by me. I want to do that for various reasons. One is, if there's one person that disagrees, I don't want there to be all this kind of tension. And so can I do that? Can I say these are the 3 people, and any decisions that are made only need to be made by 2 of them? Only 2 of them need to agree out of the 3. That's one question. I've got another brief one as well.
Great. So yeah, I think the short answer is yes, you can. In fact, it's a good idea to state that. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
And what's the second?
The second one is I had an accident about 5 years ago when I was on all sorts of pain control, and some of those things were horrendous for me and some were good. Have I got the right to say this is the pain control I would like to take should I need it? Can I be that specific?
Yeah, certainly. You can absolutely be that specific. And I think if you know a certain medication didn't agree with you, every visit, every consultation that you have with providers now in your current state is worth speaking to. Partly because it'll inform other decisions that we make about your care, not just the pain control that you'll need if you're unable to make medical decisions for yourself, but the pain control when you go back to the dentist or if you have an orthopedic surgery. So absolutely, just because you didn't have an allergic reaction to something doesn't mean that I want to hear how medication impacted you, because it'll then inform other decisions that I help make with you. But certainly in your healthcare proxy, you can absolutely put it in there as well. I will also say that this 2 out of 3 decision-making kind of setup that you have is fantastic, and I am with you. And I think that the more you engage these 3 people prior to ever having to enact proxy, the more likely that they are to be in concert when making decisions. And so love the idea of the majority rule. And I would love to set it up so that that's never an issue, because you have been so clear that everybody's going to say, Adela wanted X, and this is exactly what we're going to do.
Yeah. Thank you both very much.
That's a great question. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And I just want to pick up real quick, in our little book, A Beginner's Guide to the End, we call it care and handling instructions. You could tack on a second, separate sheet of paper to the advanced directive and call it whatever you want. We thought care and handling was cute, but there you can put details like what music you want in your room if possible. Or one that came up for us when we talked to people was like, I'm a side sleeper, and if I'm out of it and people keep putting my back, like turn me on my side. Or I like, whatever it is, you can, they may not be able to satisfy every wish, but you certainly are well within your rights to state them. And I suggest that it's a really good idea, because I remember one of these things that these documents help do is the people who love you, they want, in this very foreign place, they want to learn they want to be sure that they're doing something that registers as loving to you. So giving them that detail is not only okay, but it's really a gift. You're making it easy.
Absolutely. What's going to nourish our senses as we die? The smells that we like to smell, all our senses, the touch, what sort of touch we might like, and music, and I get that. Yeah.
Yes,
thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for chiming in from across the pond. It's really lovely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Sones, what else we got?
All right, Vito, you have been put your hand up. Thank you for your patience.
Hi, this is Vito. Yes,
Vito.
I was. I have to give an order first. Hang on.
Oh, Vito, why don't I'll go to the next person and I'll come back to you.
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
I just have a going up. I just have a comment. I went to a Big Ten university, and there was a professor in grad school that we're talking about who did this pioneering work on forgiveness, and I did it at the time, and I did it again during the pandemic, and it was really healing. But it brings up a lot of this sort of old wounds that you have to move through, and it feels like that. It feels like this similar process. Right now going through this, end of life decisions, and here I am, mortal, and who's going to make these decisions, and what do I really want or not? And I just wanted to express gratitude for this place. While I'm going through the book, it's when I feel that way, I feel like, you know what, there's a place that I could go that I could talk to about it. And I'm becoming kind of a fanboy. So thank you.
Beautiful, Vito. Thank you, man. It's nice to hear your voice again.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.
You too, buddy.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Oh, go ahead.
And while you're finding that other person, I want to say that it's so important to speak to that there's so much emotion when we have to sort of face our mortality, and to deny ourselves of that, like, oh my God, this is achiness, or this is heavy, or, oh, I got to start this conversation, and Thanksgiving isn't the time for it. Just be in there and just give yourself time to be like, ugh. And then don't let that feeling stop you from it. And I am sorry to have to say it again, but it's just so much worse when things are acute and heavy, and there's a ton of cooks in the kitchen, and there's a lot of medical terminology coming at you. And so be in the space of discomfort and give yourself that gift of having the hard conversation without added stress. And Vito, thank you for that just that reminder that our mortality just elicits so much. Go ahead, boss. Sorry about that.
No problem. Deb, let me unmute you here.
Hi, Deb.
Deb, is it working on your end? You might have to unmute yourself.
Oops.
Oh, there you are.
Hey, sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering if you could talk about the physician POLST or MOLST forms that are signed by the doctor, and do they trump your advanced directives? At least our state form has a lot more information that you can fill out about what you want and don't want. And I'm kind of using that as a guide for my daughters of what to follow, and knowing that my doctor knows what I want, so they can ask questions about things if things were to come to that. But the bottom line is, what I have on there, because it's signed by the doctor, is that going to trump what they decide that they want? Or is it going to be what they say?
Quick shout out before you answer. Sorry, guys. Deb, there's also, we're going to do a deep dive on POLST and DNRs in September. So I'm just follow that up.
Perfect. Good.
And I'm really, hi, Deb.
Hey.
I'm really glad, A, to hear your voice, and B, that you bring this up, because this is these documents, it's a newer thing than the advanced directive. And it is moving across the country as it should. And the distinction, as you're pointing out, guys, the distinction Deb is pointing out here, a POLST stands for Physician Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. MOLST is the language some states use, which is Medical Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And there's some other acronyms out there. But one of the problems with an advanced directive is they were not legally binding. They were recommendations or exhortations or something that pushes care in a certain way, but they weren't doctor's orders. They weren't legally binding in a way. I mean, the laws around this, we can talk for hours, but so that birthed this POLST thing, which is a kind of a down and dirty advanced directive, asks many of the same questions: ventilation, DNR status, artificial nutrition, hydration. It's sort of a down and dirty one piece of paper, front and back. But the big distinction is that it's actually signed by a doctor. So then it becomes a medical order, because what often ends up happening is people present advanced directives at a hospital. They're on a vacation somewhere, or they don't know the hospital. They end up in the ER and they've got their advanced directive, but it's not signed by a doctor. And maybe the families are in disagreement, and the hospital will just find all sorts of ways to not listen to the advanced directive. But if there's a POLST in hand signed by a doctor, that offers another layer of legal protection, that it be followed. And so it's really best as a companion document to your advanced directive, especially if you're living in the throes of complex advanced illness. And it's the kind of thing we tell people to put on the refrigerator in case the paramedics come to your home. But you're also pointing to, Deb, here, what happens if your POLST form says one thing and your advanced directive says another? there is no, as far as I know, there's no legal framework of how to handle per se, but because the POLST is signed by a doctor, that carries a little bit more weight and a little bit more legal protection for the hospital. But my guess is the way most hospitals would handle that is if the advanced directive was more recently filled out and the POLST is a few years old, then maybe they'll go with the advanced directive, but there's no guarantee of that. So in general, POLST does trump because it is signed by a doctor.
Yeah. And I think a POLST should be something that we use when we are going to be interfacing with the healthcare system a lot. And so I want that updated often. It has to be looked at by a physician every few weeks. And I think, BJ, you said it, but just to piggyback on it, it should mirror sort of the general ideas on the advanced directive. And so, Deb, if there's some discordance there, I would really kind of take a step back and say, like, wait a minute, why would this not match? But again, the POLST is like the actionable thing, right? And so that has to be. Go ahead, Deb. You were going to say something. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think I meant more discordance with what my daughters might want to choose, like just like antibiotics. How long to do antibiotics if there were a situation for use like that at the end of life, or how long to treat a UTI or pneumonia, that kind of a thing. So I guess it was more of like I think my forms are in order, but there's all these sticky things that come up that are like fine-tooth combs. So, how do my kids find their way through those kinds of really, really nitpicky kinds of decisions? And it seems like the POLST form, at least ours here in North Carolina, have a lot more detail than what my advanced directive does. So I just wondered about that. And also the other question is just do we have to carry these with us? We have ours registered through North Carolina, but we're all set if something happens at home, but what happens if we're 2 hours from home in the car, that kind of a thing. Do I load up my POLST every time I'm going somewhere, or, have it with me? So anyway.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of PDFs on my phone and making sure that they're emailed to all the people that I love. My doctor has my advanced directive. And so, yes, if you have a chronic illness and you have a POLST, because again, you're interfacing with the healthcare system in a way where that there's value there, then I would make sure that I had an electronic copy of it in PDF form. And different states have, like New York has the MOLST system, and there's different companies out there that make this very easy, but certainly worth having an electronic form. And to your previous point about the POLST in your children, it's important to always in these conversations that you're having with your kids, for them to give themselves grace that they're going to do the best that they can for the person that they adore, their mother, and that you're going to give them guidelines, but that they really should ask of people like BJ and me and Sonia and the rest of people at Mettle, people who are constantly caring for folks in the hospital setting, for guidance. Does it, in order to meet my mom's goals of comfort or peace or life prolongation, does this make sense? They're not alone, but they also need to give themselves a little bit of grace that it's not going to be perfect.
Right. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I went on and on and on.
No, I really appreciate that. And for me to give them that grace too, to really communicate that these are my wishes and I know it could get sticky, so that they don't feel that heaviness and weight too. So yeah, thank you.
Amen on both you guys. I mean, again, here we're trying to presuppose perhaps in the advanced directive and all our comments is that this is all controllable, that if you just state your wishes just right, you do X, Y, Z, that you can get this death that you would imagine. Again, thanks for bringing this up, Deb. You know, this is there's planning and there's life, and that's really true with how we die. So these are nudges. These get us in a ballpark. They optimize chances of X, Y, or Z happening, but the gods may have different plans for us, and that doesn't constitute a failing. That wasn't your failure for failing to plan for every little thing, and it won't be your kid's failure for making the wrong decision. These get us in the ballpark. They give us optimize things, perhaps, but then no matter what we do, the way our lives play out is not always up to us or anybody. So thanks for reminding us of that part too, Deb.
Yeah,
awesome.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys for being here and being so awesome. I'll just tell them, call Mettle.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, I know we're over time here. I don't know if you guys will give me one moment to tell a story that, remember BJ when we were writing the book, and it was about, it was at Rebecca Sudori's grandparents.
Oh yeah, this is great.
It's just the perfect example of how this happens. Like one grandparent was saying, I don't want any life-saving measures. I don't want anything. Please just let me die naturally. And then she turns to other grandparent and said, did you hear what they said? And the other grandparent says, yes, but I want them to be with me as long as humanly possible. So I'm going to do everything I can to keep them alive. And then went back to, the other grandparent. Another grandparent said, that's okay. I want her to be happy. So there's the conversation piece of this is so important and even if your wishes are one thing, you might change them based on what you want for this other person. So anyway, just nuance being the name of the game. I love that story so much. It's just a perfect example. Yeah. All right. I think we've gotten to the questions. Claritza, thank you so much. I think BJ had to jump on another call, but thank you everyone for being here. We will get this up online so that you can check it out if you want to, and hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for spending your Friday with us. We appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.